Hello, and thank you so much for joining us for this very special episode of the Enneagram and Marriage podcast. Today, we're talking about connecting authentically to process our joy and grief. We are here with none other than the wonderful Molly Stillman, author, type 2 wing 3, and one of my dear friends that I'm Julie so pleased to have today. I got to talk on her podcast last fall about my book, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to have you on our show as she processes what is already becoming a really well selling book. If I don't laugh, I'll cry. Here's the beautiful subtitle: How Death, Debt, and Comedy Led to a Life of Faith, Farming, and Forgetting What I Came into This Room For. Oh my gosh. Forward by Christa and Hannah. This book is already off the charts because Molly is so real, so authentic. And as we all know, in this moment in culture, this is exactly what we all need. We are dealing, if you're here live, tail end after Palm Sunday, March 2024, right after the awful, hard aftermath of Princess Kate's cancer diagnostics, we are just reeling as a culture because not many people are used to, in the especially Gen X and up, just sharing authentically with what's happening with us. And yet there's also a sense of like, we all need privacy, right? So we're trying to figure out, how do I connect authentically and hold for privacy? And obviously we all really feel so sorrowful for Princess Kate, feeling probably like the truth was pried out of her, but how also grateful were we that she was vulnerable and shared. And I hope we can honor her and everybody else who's vulnerable and shares. I know many of us follow YouTubers or Instagram accounts that help us to do that. This episode today, so glad you pressed play. That is exactly what we're doing today with Molly, because Molly is seriously authentic. I don't know her Myers-Briggs, but I know her Enneagram, and I'm telling you, she has done her work on the two stuff. So if you thought you were coming to talk to a two who is going to be full of pride, absolutely not. She's actually even has on her stillbeingmolly.com, so her website, where she's like, she lives the type of life then when she shares, people stop in their tracks and ask, wait, what happened? Molly is seriously so vulnerable. And her new book, which I loved, and is one of those books that is a page turner to the point that you will be reading it all night like I was. And so many people said the same already in the pre-reading, that she's like, oh my gosh, how could you live your whole life and then have people page turning all night long the first night? Yes, that was me, because it's so good. I'm just so grateful that we're here right at the launch time to just welcome her into her beautiful book tour. And she's already off to the races with that beautiful 2 wing 3 energy. So happy as we welcome her. I want you to know that the reason, of course, for this podcast is so you can be touched in your life, so that you can connect authentically to process your work, and to do that with us as we share here too. So I hope this is an episode which will touch your heartstrings, but also help you to feel the balance of knowing, gosh, I'm not alone when I'm struggling with the worst, hardest moments of my life. We're talking about some of these topics: the loss of her mother, the huge debt that she calls death by 1,000 cuts, and how that happened, and just other vulnerable pieces of her life and relationship. And there's even way more in her book. So that's in the show notes. And that is just so refreshing, because as we know, when we're in that two space, we can be like, no, I have my pride. I can't tell anybody. I can't be vulnerable. And I'm telling you guys, her vulnerability attracted so many people, including me, to just like, wow, see God's work in her life as she laid that down, came into humility and also joy. So yes, this is a great episode for not just grief, not just authenticity, which are hard things, but joy that results from doing your grief work, and also from authenticity, which results in joy, true joy and laughter. So looking forward to her. And then even before she comes on, I just wanted to say I did a little bit of back research, and I noticed that humor is so good for us mentally. I figured, but it was just a beautiful gift to be able to see that there's a lot of studies, multiple, that show that when we have humor, we also have positive well-being in our lives. Engaging in humor exercise associated with positive mood. In one study in 2016, a sense of humor is associated with increased life satisfaction and a pleasurable, engaged life. Humor has been reported among the top 8 of 24 characteristic strengths, and is associated with life satisfaction and stable positive mood, on and on and on. Molly has the ticket here to being able to do the deep work with connection with others, and also with humor. So we're going to welcome her on. Just before we come on with her, I just want to remind you that we have our wonderful collective opening up just for this week, so that if you need in-person, on Zoom time with me, if you want my inner dive on how to strike up health in your marriage and find your ways of shining together, you can join our membership group, which we only open just a few times a year so that we can just allow for growth and focus in there. We have every single week deep dive podcasts. Right now we're going through our sexual intimacy series, and we're also doing that in our talk this month, which will be a wonderful time as well, where we can fellowship and just hang out and talk about the nitty gritty, but also in ways that you might not want to do on a podcast, right? So anyway, check the show notes for that. So happy it's open this week for you as well. All right, let's talk to Molly. Molly, thank you so much for coming on the E&M pod. We're so happy to have you.
I'm just absolutely thrilled. It is a joy to be with you. And you and I connected on my podcast back in the fall. And so I feel like we're like, now we're old friends reconnecting. So this is a joy.
Yes, I love it. And how we were sharing author stories before we got on. Guys, there's some crazy things that happen to authors, isn't there?
Yes. Yes. Big time.
Oh my gosh. Well, we're so happy to have you on, and everybody wants to hear a little bit about you. So maybe we could start there where you just introduce you guys. Everyone here loves personality types. So obviously we want to hear about those too for you and your
Yes.
hubby.
Yes. So my name is Molly Stillman, and I'm married to John. We just celebrated 12 years of marriage. We've been together 14 years, which it's funny. Sometimes I look at myself in the mirror and I'm like, I'm not old enough to have been married. That like it sounds like a long time. Like,
Yeah, I get that.
we're not new to this. And I am also a wife, or excuse me, a mom to Lily, who is 10, and Amos, who is 8. And I am the new author of If I Don't Laugh, I'll Cry, and which releases at the end of March. And I've been in the writing and content creation space for nearly 20 years, and have been I just love creative work. I host a podcast called Can I Laugh on Your Shoulder, which you were a lovely guest on, and I live on a small farm. And then as far as our Enneagram type, so I am a 2 wing 3. And my husband is an 8. He is an 8. And I kind of joke that he is an 8 wing 8. Like he doesn't,
I love that.
I just don't really, but it's funny how, I mean, he's taken the test and he is 100% an 8. But I think after some time and like really getting to know the types, I think he has a slight wing 9. And so that's just my guess. But because I'm like, he's not an 8-7.
Yeah.
So he's got to be an 8-9, but there's very little.
Oh my gosh.
But he's a healthy 8. He's a lot of 8. There's a whole lot of it.
I love how you talk about him in the book. You're like married to John Stillman is a whole thing.
Yeah, it's a whole thing. He's the best. And it's funny how the two of us really complement each other. So, which I know we'll probably talk about. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Absolutely. And maybe you could share just a tidbit about how you met. You go into more depth, of course, in your beautiful pages, which we'll talk about. But
yeah, so we met in, we both actually were recently talking about this. Like, I'm really glad that we kind of met before the age of like where really everybody was dating online. Like online dating was kind of new-ish at the time. Like Match.com existed. And then there was like a free version of OkCupid, which I went on like one date with somebody from OkCupid, and it was a hot mess express. So we met at work. So I was working at a radio station in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and he was also there. And if any of you are fans of The Office, we really liken our experience to working at this radio station to picture The Office, but taking place at a radio station instead of a paper company. And he was Jim Halpert and I was Pam.
Oh my God.
Because I was really like, I started off at this radio station as the, kind of the front desk girl, but I was a little bit of everything from reception to, marketing to some on-air stuff. And he was in sales.
Oh my gosh.
So we really started off as friends. And I tell you, like, I could go down a whole rabbit hole of we have like cast
your book, I hear
Oh yeah.
Roy, Richard,
Yeah. Oh my gosh. There was a Roy Richard combination there. Yeah. But we had, I mean, we definitely had, we had a Michael, we had a Dwight, we had like, we had an Angela, like there was, it was just really interesting. And that was kind of at the peak of the office. And we were just like, what world are we living in? Like where we really kind of have, we had an Ed Helms, an Andy Bernard, all of it. So like who was literally in a college a cappella group. So anyway, like I mean, we had, yes, like we had all the characters. But anyway, but John and I were Jim and Pam. And so we were friends first. But I was, in a really dark season of my life when we first met. And I was, I was not walking with the Lord. I was tens of thousands of dollars in debt. I was depressed. I mean, it was a mess. I was a bit of a mess. And here he was, a mess in his own way, but really not very much a mess. Like he was, just pretty responsible. He was just always kind of a very steady, and this is something I talk about him a lot. And just, I love to brag on my husband is just, he's just a very steadfast individual. Like he's just always been really secure and strong. And, I attribute it a lot to just his parents raised him really well. Like his parents are just phenomenal human beings. They've been married over 45 years. They just are really a great example of what a strong biblical marriage looks like. And they raised an amazing kid who grew up to be an amazing man. But so we started hanging out. We just kind of as friends. But pretty quickly, I did start to like him, but I was also in a place where I did not want a relationship in any way, shape, or form. I was, and isn't that like kind of when it happens a lot? I was like, I was not ready for a relationship. I was in no mental space to handle a relationship, and he had never had a girlfriend, and so it's not that he hadn't gone on dates with girls really, but he had never like had a girl in his life that he had called a girlfriend. And so it worked out well for the both of us in that he was like, oh, I don't have a girlfriend. And I was like, well, I don't want a relationship. So this is great. And so our first date was to a Toby Keith concert, and it was me and him and 8 of his friends. So it was very romantic. And we didn't really know that it was a date, but in the end, it ended up being a date. He did kiss me at the end of the night, and then he texted me the next day, and we just started hanging out all the time. We would go, we were working together, so we were around each other all the time. But then we would kind of find ways to see each other as much as we could, and very quickly, I knew something was different about him. He was. And I learned he was a Christian, and there was this steadfast to him. There was this security in his identity. He was who he was, and he wasn't there was no pretense. There was no facade. There was no fakeness. It was just and he still is that way. And that's kind of why I joke, he's an 8-wing 8. He is what you see is what you get. You are not going to get a fake version of John Stillman in any way, shape, or form at any time.
Great.
He laughs that and I laugh that he has kind of a couple things about him that are very unique to him. One is he loves nothing more than to make people feel uncomfortable. Making a funny joke that makes them uncomfortable, or asking them a question that makes them feel uncomfortable. He just loves to push buttons a little bit, which is very Enneagram 8. And then the other thing about him is that he loves to cultivate a persona in which at any given time people might think that he is security.
Oh my gosh.
We are somewhere he wants to cultivate a persona in which someone thinks is that guy security for this event? The protector. He's just because he's tall. He gets confused for military a lot because he kind of has a look like he's in the military, but he's not. He's never been in the military. Although this is, and I can say this because I'm the daughter of somebody who was in the military. We've been out to restaurants before where we will have been doing work on the farm all day, and he'll have camo pants on from, outside work pants. And we'll be at dinner and we'll have somebody pay for our meal because they
Oh
think we're a
my.
military family. And he's like, I don't want to yeah, but it's like they do it anonymously. And then he's like,
Yeah.
oh, shoot. So then
Oh,
we end up paying for somebody else's. And I'm like, well, you can say like, I'm the
oh
daughter of a
my.
military person. But that's like the kind of persona that he kind of like
Oh.
wants to cultivate. So anyway, so that, and then we started dating. I started attending church. I got saved. Rest is history. We did finally admit that I was his girlfriend when we both were assigned to work a remote broadcast for the radio station on Halloween.
Wow.
So and if anybody knows anything about North Carolina, especially Chapel Hill, Franklin Street, which is the main street in downtown Chapel Hill, is like country renowned for Halloween celebrations. And so
Ooh.
we were assigned to do a remote from Halloween in the craziness of
Mhm.
it. And so we went
Mhm.
as Forrest Gump and Jenny.
Oh,
And
so
and when he
cute.
picked me up, he I was like, "Hey, Forrest," and he said, "You're my girl, Jenny."
Oh my gosh, that's so cute.
And I was like, and I remember being like, "Oh, so I'm your girl," and he was like, "I guess this means you're my girlfriend."
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
Yeah. And then like 5 days later, he told me he loved me. And then like a month later, he was like, we're gonna get married. So it it escalated quickly beyond there. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's the story.
Oh my gosh. And you've said so much in the telling about your types. And I love that he finally had to show that vulnerability, but he had to do
Yes.
it in this off the cuff way. Like,
Oh yeah, for
not
sure.
going to happen where he is like super open hearted, yet, of course, it's revelatory. And we saw his huge
Yes.
open heart anyway.
Yes. Exactly. Exactly.
Oh,
Exactly.
wow. That's beautiful. And so, what would you say to other 2-8 listeners if there was just a tip you could say, hey guys, maybe you're earlier in your marriage, or some of them are even past you guys? What would you just say to other 2s and 8s out there, and maybe something that you've learned along the way?
Yeah. So, yeah, we really, and it's funny because we really fit into our types really well. And I've actually done some reading on it that 2s and 8s fit really well together because of like his,
Mhm.
the harder side of like I bring out his softer side and he brings out a more boldness in me that I might not
Oh,
be able to really cultivate on my own. Um,
mhm.
so the number one key, and I really say this, I was actually having a conversation with a good friend last night about this, like our we learned very early on in our marriage that for us and our particular just how we operate, but I think this is something that can be applied in any marriage, no matter what your personality types are, is like communicate, 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 over communicate,
Mm.
communication. Because the moment that communication starts to get taken out of the equation in our marriage, that's when we start to feel distant. That's when, maybe we're not being as intimate. That's when we are
Mm.
just there is a division that comes there.
Mm.
And what we've found is that my nature as a two and as somebody who um my deep fears are that I am not loved or wanted.
Yeah.
And so I have to over communicate to him
Yeah.
those needs and fears. I can't assume
Mm.
that he knows that I need him to communicate that he loves me and wants me. Even
Right?
though we are in a covenant relationship, I don't think it like,
Mhm. Yeah.
Lord willing, nothing's gonna like, he's not
Sure.
going anywhere.
Right.
But I need that constant reminder. Whereas, like, for him, that kind of communication, like words of affirmation,
Mhm.
like for the 8, like that's just not, it is
Not
not his
Yeah,
deal. He
not his
does not
brand.
care. It's not that he doesn't think I don't love him, but like if I'm not actually showing intentionality in, spending time with him, pursuing intimacy with him, like my actions reflecting my words, then for him, he starts to feel unloved. And
Mm.
so we've really had to communicate that like our individual unique needs. And it
Mm.
wasn't, and I think part of it is like he was an only child. He I was his first girlfriend. So in a lot of ways, like we kind of had to fumble along a little bit because I was a new Christian when we got together, but I
Yeah.
had a string of relationships where I had a lot of relational baggage that I had to deal with.
Yeah.
Um, and he had none. So it was
Right.
like we kind of came in this very unique. So in some ways, like he didn't know that we needed to be communicating about just anything and everything. And he's a man of few words. I'm a woman of many words. And
Yeah.
so we had to learn how to ask the right questions of each other, listen to understand rather than like
Mm.
listen to respond.
Mhm.
So those were things we learned really early on in our marriage, and we've really tried to implement. For me, like if we're, let's just say there's conflict or there's something that we're both kind of struggling with, or an area we need to improve. I need a compliment sandwich.
Yeah. Yeah, your
The
positivity
Enneagram
type.
2
Yes.
needs a compliment
Mhm.
sandwich.
Yep.
Because if he comes out and he tells me something I'm doing wrong, it destroys me.
Yeah.
it just, it's
Right.
the only thing I can focus on. And
Yeah.
hearing an area that I need to improve, it's not that I don't want to hear it, it's that it is hard for me.
Yeah. Yes, I
So
know you want to hear it actually as a 2, as a person who pursues harmony, but it's hard.
it's really hard. And so it needs to be done in a really loving way. So early on, we learned because for him as an 8,
Mhm.
he just needs it direct. You
Yep.
just know, do
Exactly.
not
Just say it.
compliment
Don't beat
sandwich.
around the bush. Yeah.
Don't beat around the bush. Like you just need to come out and say it. And so like just actually on Sunday night, so we're recording this on Wednesday. On Sunday night, he and I, we did a great conversation. Just we talked for like 2 or 3 hours after the kids went to bed on Sunday night. We're just talking about just things in life and marriage. And he asked me a question. He's like, what could I do? Like, what's an area of spiritual leadership where I need to grow in our home? Like he just straight up asked me.
Mm.
And he was like, what's something I could do? And I just was like, and then I gave him the answer just straight up, and he was like, I'm really glad you told me that. I had no idea. You know what I mean? And it was just like, I just said, hey, I would really like if you would do this. I was like, I've kind of wanted you to do this, but I felt nervous to ask you. And so this was like my opportunity to say, hey, could you do
Mhm.
this? He was like, you know what? I hear that. That's
Mhm.
really great. All right, I'm working on it. And so,
Mm.
but for him,
Cool.
like he needs that like direct,
Mm.
this
Mhm.
is what I need from you. Whereas like something like
Mm.
that to me would be just like, I'd be like, I'm the worst wife ever. And like, so, he's had to learn
Yeah.
how to communicate to me,
Mm.
not the way that he wants me to communicate to him.
Yeah.
And I think that that's, again, a
Yeah.
lesson for all marriages, all couples, no matter
Yeah,
what
I do.
numbers you are, is like
Mhm.
more often than not, we default to communicating with our spouse the way we want to be communicated to
Right.
rather than how they want to be communicated to.
Oh my gosh, it's so true. Whatever personality overlay, it's going to happen where there's some
For
sort of
sure.
a cross and a mismatch, and you're like, we can bridge this and we can even show our kids 2 different ways. But at the same time, we also need to actually let each other know what the needs are, what the wants are. I also
Right.
notice even the timing of that Sunday night you mentioned. And I think often couples need that. I was just thinking of something with my husband I needed to tell him, and I was like, Krista, wait for the right timing. And that's not always something I've done well. And I think that, like, by Sunday night, usually in marriages, people have had enough of a weekend also to just be a bit more themselves at their best, where you could communicate fresh, he could receive it, versus if you share it on he's less likely to ask after a really hard day, hey, what can I do better, babe? You know?
Yeah.
So paying attention to timing and your different dynamics. Also, I think you really bless the 2 8s out there, because it gives them that reminder of that compliment sandwich, which the positivity types 2, 7, and 9 really need.
Yeah.
And a few 8s will want words of affirmation, especially that 8 wing 7 may tend toward more of that. But I've seen the love languages, and that's really a 2 thing to want words of affirmation more than
Yes.
the acts of service or quality time, although you want those too.
Yeah.
Ah, well, this is so cool. Let me ask you, you shared the beautiful title of your book, and I got to talk about that before you came on as well. But your subtitle is also so beautiful when you talk about how death and comedy led to a life of faith farming and forgetting what I came into this room for. And it's so fun to say it. It just
I
felt like
know.
a rhyme. But I
Yeah.
also really know there's heart of depth, and our listeners are also here today to walk through just how you dealt and deal with adversity. And I just want to say, as a two, guys, watch how much she's grown from this space of maybe not wanting to share. And in your book, you talk about like, hey, you're two wing three, you want to perform, you want to achieve. And you're like, I'm giving that to God. That space is God's. And I want to be humble and share helping tips. So I just
Yeah.
want everyone to know that she's not coming from this place of pride as a two. Although
Mhm.
beautifully, you did show healthy pride in your husband. And I'm just like, oh, that's so beautiful to see that
Yeah.
walk as a two.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
So, like I said before, I look back now and I'm at a place in my life, I'm 38 and I'm at I've been walking with the Lord now for almost 14 years.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of inner, I'm a work in progress. I am never going to arrive,
Yeah.
by any
Yes.
means. In fact, a friend of mine shared this with me the other day, on the headstone of Ruth Graham, Billy Graham's wife. She
Mhm.
has inscribed on there, "Construction complete. Thank you for your patience." And
Oh,
so, like, I just love that so much about this picture of like we are our whole lives
oh.
under construction, and it's not until the day
Mhm.
that we go to be with the Lord where it's like, all
Mm.
right,
Yeah.
we've done our job. So I say all that to say that, like,
Yeah.
the person that's talking now has over a decade of counseling and spiritual work and really just
Thank you.
growing and growth and maturity and
Mm. Mm.
but still I mess up and fail all the time, but
Thank
I'm
you.
certainly not where I once was and not where I want to be. And so I think that that's our all of our goals, right? It's
Yeah.
like we want to be a little bit closer to Jesus with
Yeah.
each day. We want to be a little bit more spiritually and emotionally mature
Yeah.
with each day. So, it's just growing. So,
Yeah.
um, but my personality type, even from a very young age, I know we're not supposed to type kids, but I look back and I'm like, I was a two
Mm.
wing three from a very early
I
age.
see that in your book too. I can
Yes.
tell. Mhm.
Yes, just
So
always,
beautiful.
I cared about people deeply. I still care about people. But then I was always like, there was, just this drive to perform and make people laugh.
Mhm.
And really at the heart of it was I just loved bringing joy to other people, which is also at the
Mm.
heart of it
Yeah.
too, is that is, just the giving nature,
Yeah.
helping nature. That
Mhm.
was a big part of my life. And so I wanted to be a
Mm.
comedian. I wanted to be on Saturday Night Live
Yeah.
um, and I don't know to this day, obviously, I don't know what Enneagram type my mom was, but I actually think she was probably a two as well. She was a
I'm
nurse. And so
wondering.
I,
Yeah.
I feel
Mhm.
like she
Mhm.
probably was a two. But I
Or
don't,
an 8, a healthy 8.
or a
I
healthy
saw
eight.
2 8, and of course, 2s have a very strong arrow when they're, doing their work to be able to
Yeah.
stand in the 8 space. So her,
Yeah.
petitioning and demonstrating, and so there's
Mm,
so much here, so much richness. One of the biggest pieces you've shared about, your life is your loss of your dear mother and,
mhm.
young loss, and I think that that's something that our audience, many of them are in the sandwich generation themselves of getting who are in that process. What was that like to process that? Was that a long time? I know you're probably still processing that. Can you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So for some context, and very long story short, my mom was a army nurse in Vietnam and huge advocate for women veterans.
Oh my
And
god, yeah.
she contracted a very rare collagen vascular autoimmune disease in the fall
Mm,
of 1994 due to her exposure to Agent Orange.
yeah.
And she battled the disease for
Mm,
8 years and
mm,
finally passed away the fall of my senior year of high school.
mm,
And
mhm.
so it was a really, I didn't at the time have the emotional tools, the spiritual tools, the relational tools,
Yeah,
to deal with and process it in a healthy way.
yeah.
And I think what's really interesting again, as because she died in the fall. Excuse me, I have the hiccups.
It's okay.
She
Okay.
died in the fall of 2002, and that was, 21 and a half, 22 years ago almost.
Mm.
And I, I look back now and I look at the way that I processed it in such an unhealthy way. And what I mean by that is I was finding myself like she died in the middle of the night in our home on a Thursday night / Friday morning.
Mm.
The paramedics came, it was around 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. After everything was all said and done, by the time the paramedics had left with her body, it was, probably in the 5:30, 5 in the morning range.
Mm. Mhm.
And of course, I wasn't going back to sleep at that point.
Yeah.
And the people that we had called had left the house, and there was this kind of eerie quietness in the house. It was just me and my dad. And I remember I wasn't crying at that point. Like I just kind of was in this daze, and I was like, I have to go to school. Like it's time for school.
Mm.
And I
Mm.
remember like changing into school clothes. And then I got in my car and I drove to school.
Mm.
And then I walked into school, and I remember walking through the hallways, and I was immediately stopped by my assistant principal. And the principal stopped me and he's like, Molly, what are you doing here? Like my best friend's mom had called school to be like, hey, this is
Yeah.
what happened. Wanted to give the school the heads up. So like the school had already been notified. And I'm
Yeah.
there walking the halls, but I
Yeah.
have no backpack. I have no books. Like I'm just like a zombie. And I was walking through the hallways, and the principal's like, Molly, what are you doing here? And I was like, I have to go to school. Like we
Yeah.
can laugh about this now. Like it's
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
And he's like, Molly, do you know what class you go? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know what class I'm supposed to go to. And he's
Yeah.
like, where's your backpack? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I'm like, I
Right.
don't know. I'm where I'm in doing the thing that in my brain, I'm like, I'm supposed to do.
Right.
And he's like, go home.
Right.
Like leave, please. And
Yeah.
so I turn around, I walk back to my car, and my car was still running.
Mm.
And and then I got in my car and I drove home. But I think that that was a great microcosm example of then how I continued to process things. I just was like, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Everything is fine. I don't need any help.
Yeah.
I'm going to be just fine and I can deal with this on my own, which is a
Mhm.
very
Mhm.
characteristic thing of an unhealthy two, of
Right.
just like, I don't need anybody's help. I
Right.
can do this on my own. If I ask for help, that shows vulnerability. Ain't
Right.
going to show that. And so that was how I continued to process and deal with it for a very long time.
Yeah, yeah. So the Molly we're seeing now, like we're saying, is not the Molly that you
No.
started as.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so
Yeah.
fascinating. And I mean, seeing that in your book, juxtaposed with the stories of your mom and her processing trauma, I see some similarities where she too is a strong woman who's like, I'm going to take you to I think it was an NSYNC concert.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
she's like, "Hey, we're gonna do this." And then she has a traumatic moment, and you had to do that for her, and then your principal had to do it for you, and
Yeah.
now you're doing it for others, and it's just this cycle of us all learning and growing, and, like, I hope this is implicit to every listener. There's no fault with trauma. No one is bad
No.
or wrong, but I think
No.
we're feeling in this culture, like we said, with all these careful veils, like,
Yeah.
I'm not allowed to have a bad moment. I'm not allowed to.
Right.
So sometimes we might go into a state of a shock or like you said, it might have been that issue of pride for the two. It might have been something totally different, but either way you needed support, and I
Yeah.
am so glad you had people and God's grace over you even in moments.
Yeah.
I also noticed in your story you had and I won't give too much away, but just I saw a two thread when your mom passed that I thought was actually healthy. And here's to speak of you being healthy is, and your mom, so many healthy stories. But you also really showed up for asking for friends, which I thought was really neat after she passed. Like you
Yeah.
were like, I
Yeah.
need you people.
Yeah. And I think in that moment it was like I knew deep down that being alone was a bad thing at the
Mm,
moment.
wow.
Now that did not continue. Like I certainly, I mean, had years and years, and I write about this in the book, like years of isolation and being alone
Yeah.
and not wanting to show vulnerability and
Yeah.
dealing with shame and embarrassment, all that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, in the immediate moments, I called my boyfriend of 5 whole days, bless his heart. bless his heart. The poor guy. I look back, I'm like, he wasn't a bad guy. He never stood a chance. Like,
Right.
he asked me to be his girlfriend 5 days
Oh my
before the death
God.
of my mother. This poor,
Right. Was
poor,
unexpected death
and he was a
too.
young, he was a year younger than me, like just never stood a chance.
Yeah.
But he showed up like somehow, we didn't have cell phones. So it was like he just, maybe we did. We had like the Nokia where you could like
Yeah.
change the
Yeah.
faceplate. But I mean, I remember either calling his house or calling his phone. I don't remember, but he answered miraculously. It was like, 2 in the morning. And I just said, I was like, my mom's dead. I need you. And he came over. And then I called
Mm.
my best friends, and one was out of town, and I look back, I'm like, I don't have maybe that's also because at the time, like we all kept our ringers on because we all like bought ringtones. Like, remember that time where now I'm like, if my phone makes a sound, I'm throwing it into the ocean.
Right?
Um,
Sounds
yeah,
awesome.
so different. But yeah, so I mean, I called a few people, and they showed up and they came. And it was just matter of like, I knew that my dad and I couldn't be alone in that moment. But that certainly didn't continue for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, it was these pockets of grace that were also there along the way. And you had to take time to learn that. And I love how you're candid to say, look, guys, nobody grieves perfectly, but
Yeah.
when we're healthier, we do learn healthier things. We're going to talk about that too, because I know that's been part of the journey. And then I also know that I was kind of thinking here, you had some layers and they were kind of wrapped up in each other, that you had some financial stress also
Mhm.
kind of carrying you when you said, I'm carrying things that my husband didn't have as much. Of course, it's sometimes people want to judge each other. And it's like, no, you had a different circumstance than him.
Yeah.
Your mom was hurt by Agent Orange. She was such a brave, amazing leader and such a godly woman in so many ways. And so, all the layers of trauma she endured at Vietnam
Mhm.
and beyond when she was received poorly by the US. And you share all of this in your book. You guys have to read this in such detail. But all of that said, what do you feel like happened for some of the unhealthy coping mechanisms like finances and others that started to take over when you were grieving?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it all stems to the fact that I didn't want to be a burden. Like
Mm,
and that's something I
mm,
still struggle with
yeah,
and
yeah,
wrestle with. Like, I still
yeah.
have
Our stuff
times where
still
I'm,
gets us.
especially too, is like we just,
Yeah.
being a burden is like,
Yes.
it is like kryptonite. I don't, because
Mm,
I don't want people to reject me. And
right.
and I feel like if I ask for help, or if I feel like if I'm a burden, then people are going to reject me. They're not going to want me. They're going to think I'm too much. Like, that is
Yeah.
just, a deep fear. So that was certainly like at the core, the root of it all.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, so I mean, I really dove into, striving. So that's where the three really came out, especially in college. Is like I used college as this opportunity. I was like, well, this is my chance to reinvent myself. This is my chance to like prove everybody wrong, whoever like had it in their head that I wasn't like good enough or smart enough or cool enough or pretty enough or
yeah.
funny enough or whatever. It was like I was going to college, and like these people, they don't know me. Like, I can start over. It's Molly 2.0, everyone. And so that
Yeah.
was a big piece of it.
Yeah.
And then I really, so that was, I mean, that was an unhealthy way to cope. Is It was just like this constant striving for achievement, this constant seeking of my identity in success, in the things of the world. And those things, as we know, like they're fleeting, and they're going to let you down. And so that was a big
Mm,
piece of it. And then, we grew up I grew up in a house, like, where it was lots of love, but there was also a lot of struggle. And so,
yeah.
with my mom's illness, but also we struggled financially.
Mhm.
And the first day, or my 21st birthday,
Mm,
it was August 23rd, 2006 was my 21st
mm,
birthday.
mm,
And it was like the second day of classes, my senior year of college. And I get in the mail
mm.
a paper check for nearly $250,000. And it was, long story short, it was a surprise, unexpected inheritance from my mom's estranged family. Her
Mm.
family had become estranged. during her illness. And
Mm.
so
Mm.
I ended up getting an inheritance from my deceased grandparents that I did not really know was coming.
Mm.
And so what happens when you give a 21-year-old
Right.
girl who is grieving, who is
Right?
dealing with unhealthy coping mechanisms and striving for success and achievement, $250,000 taxes have already been paid.
Oh my goodness. She's not going to do the Dave Ramsey counting every dollar. Let me guess.
Oh my gosh, no. Now I do, Krista, I want to give myself some credit because I also
Okay.
am very self-deprecating
Yes.
in that like
Yes.
I will
Yes.
own my
Yes.
mistakes and I
Right.
own
Yes.
the fact
Yes.
that I screwed up big time.
But right.
But I did also I give some of it to my dad, I gave some of it to my half sister, and then I started a scholarship at my mom's or at my university in my mom's name, and to this day I still every year I get a letter from the recipient of the scholarship. So
Oh
like
my
I
gosh.
did do some good with it that I knew deep down that I was like, this,
Yeah.
I want to do something good
Yeah.
with it. But
Yes.
then beyond that, I never thought outside of like, I
Yeah.
never thought about the long term
Yeah.
financial benefits for myself.
Yeah, which is so classic too. Like you said, if you're not healthy, like you're thinking about others, not like,
Yeah.
how can I take care of myself long term?
Right. And instead, I used it as short term, like, well,
Yeah.
this is fun. And
Fun.
so
Yeah.
guess what I
Yeah.
did? I went
A
and I
lot of fun
bought
with your
a
friends.
$40,000 brand new car. And then I went and I flew my boyfriend and I first class to Rome for spring
Oh,
break. And then, I went
yeah.
to New York and I was taking classes, comedy classes, and went shopping on Fifth Avenue. And it just was like, car aside, first class trip aside, like it
Yeah.
was death by a thousand cuts
Yeah.
very quickly, where it was
Mm.
just,
Yeah. Yeah.
little expense here, little expense here, little expense there, just adding up. And it never occurred to me to like budget
Right.
or
Right.
track what I was spending or
Right.
check my accounts. And then I'm like
Yeah.
signing up for these credit cards with really high limits because I get a free t-shirt or something.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I
Yeah.
just, I realized because for me, like a lot of times, not always, certainly, but a lot of times when people are grieving, they find unhealthy coping mechanisms, and oftentimes, especially for college students, things like that, it can
Yeah.
be drugs or alcohol, sex, things like that. Those were not my vices. I've
Yeah.
never done a drug in my life. It's
Yeah.
not a thing. Growing up, I think the daughter of recovering alcoholics, I
Mhm,
think that
mhm.
played into it, and I was
Exactly,
like,
yeah.
I ain't
You
touching
had
drugs with a
meetings at
10
your
foot
house. Yeah.
hard pass. And alcohol really wasn't an issue for me. So it just
You're so funny.
wasn't, that was not my, that was not my coping mechanism. But for me, like
Right.
I got the same adrenaline rush, dopamine hit
Yeah.
from spending money. Like
Right,
it was
right,
not as a sexy of an addiction, but
right,
it
right.
is. And it's a
Just as
thing that
devastating in other ways.
people don't want to talk about it. And so
Mhm.
that was another thing but again, I was doing all of this in secret. I
Mhm.
didn't like, one, you don't get a $250,000 check and just like start walking around campus and being like,
Right.
everybody, look today. You don't do that. So it began a season of my life where I was kind of not, I, I guess maybe I should say like living a bit of a double life, like
Yeah.
where I had the life that I let people see and let people know, and then the life that was actually happening behind closed
Mhm.
doors.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good way of describing it. I bet a lot of us can relate to that. And
Yeah.
before doing our work, and like you said, also just knowing that humans often have a secretive part of them, just knowing, okay, guys, you can't, you're really a testimony, like it will come find you.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Wow. So what happened? How did it come and find you?
Well, so less than 2 years later, I ended up, I got the check in August of 2006. By June of 2008, I was a year out of college. I was working as a high school English teacher, making $30,000 a year.
Mhm. I
And
was raised by a high school English teacher on one
yeah,
salary, so I know
yes,
that life.
yes. And I realized that I had maxed out every credit card I had, that I couldn't make minimum payments on it anymore. And
Mm.
came to learn that I was over $36,000 in consumer credit card debt.
Mm, mhm.
So I had not only
Yeah.
spent every last dime,
Yeah.
but and then some. And I
Yeah.
was now tens of thousands of dollars in consumer credit card debt.
Yeah.
And the shame, the
Mm,
embarrassment,
mm,
the self condemnation that I felt uh, took me decades,
mm,
like
mm,
over a decade to get over.
mm.
Um, and I really struggled with, because a lot of it too stemmed from this should have been my mom's money. Like
Yeah.
this, I got myself into this mess. I made these mistakes. And then of course, like I'm going through the spiraling of like, I'm a terrible person. I'm the worst. Like, why did I do this? Um, I hit, when I hit that financial rock bottom, and it just, the shame that was associated with it. And I immediately was like, well, I can't tell anybody about this. I
Mm,
definitely can't tell my dad. I definitely can't tell my sister. Like, I definitely can't tell my roommate. Like,
yeah.
and so I ended up, I had a panic attack, and then I ended up actually on the phone with my bank. And who knew, I still to this day like would love to somehow track down these two customer service representatives that got way more than they bargained for this
Yeah.
day.
Oh,
But they
that's
saved
so
my life.
sweet.
They saved my life
Oh,
because I heard compassion
yeah.
in their voices,
Mm,
and I was calling in a moment of desperation initially, just to like ask for forgiveness for overdraft fees, and like thinking like, all right, I'll start there. But
yeah.
it turned very quickly into hours long conversation on the phone with these, banking representatives,
Wow.
helping me figure out how much debt I was in, and
Mm.
help me begin a plan of how I was going to get myself out of that mess.
Probably Enneagram ones or fives.
I
Just
know.
like
Well, I mean,
super. Oh,
and I just think about the fact, like, I mean, these were Debbie and Janet. Debbie was the one from
oh,
BB&T, and Janet was the one from Novadebt. And like,
oh,
they'll never know that they
oh.
saved my life. And, but that, getting the opportunity to tell a perfect stranger what was happening, and to hear compassion in
Mm,
their voices, and to hear like, you're going to be
hope.
okay. Um,
Mm,
and
mhm.
but it was not like everything was like
Yeah.
great after that. I mean, then I had to cut up all my credit cards, and I had to like
Yeah.
really figure out how I was going to get out of debt. And it was a really lonely journey. But eventually you'd think that that would have been my rock bottom. It was certainly financial rock bottom, but it was not my emotional and spiritual rock bottom. That took another two
Mm,
years. And so
mm,
then it wasn't until 2010 when I moved to North Carolina. I was working multiple jobs. I had just gotten out of a very unhealthy relationship. And I was at the lowest point. I lived alone.
mm.
I was just alone in what felt like every sense of the word.
Yeah.
And I felt like the only way out was to take my own life. And that, when
Mm,
you get to like that really dark place,
yeah.
and you feel like all hope is lost, it takes a moment of desperation to get you out of it.
Mhm.
And that's what eventually led me to I was, I was hanging out with John, and I asked if I could go to church with him, and that was my last ditch effort. I was kind of
Mhm.
at that place where I was like,
Mhm.
if this Jesus thing doesn't work, like,
Yeah. Yeah, I'm
you
screwed.
know,
Yeah.
I'm screwed.
Yeah.
But I was like, I gotta give it a shot. And so I did. I went, and I went to church, and it's not like I had this, raise your hands, fall on my face. Not that that doesn't happen, but that wasn't my story where I gave my life to Christ, and everything changed. It was more of I heard the gospel for the first time, and I
Mm.
heard that there was a God in heaven who loves me and
Mm,
created me on purpose, with a purpose and for a purpose, and that there was nothing in my life that I'd done that couldn't be redeemed, that couldn't be
mm.
forgiven.
Yeah.
And I had never heard that before.
Oh,
I'd never heard it before. And I walked out of the doors of church that day with hope.
Mm.
And when you give a sense of hope to a hopeless person,
Mm.
it's a powerful thing. And so I went back to church the next week and the next week and the next week. And then I
Mm.
went on a mission trip and I started tithing and I auditioned for the worship team and I dove headfirst and I just, it began that slow process of healing. And it's taken time and it's taken work, but it's been so worth it.
Oh my gosh, that's so beautiful. And I think that what stands out to me, and hopefully our listeners too, here is you did not give credit to money or to fame or
Mhm.
to the relationship partner. You're not trying to do that to be mean about those things. We need money. It's wonderful to have a partner, etc. But you're like, none of that saved me. None of that can save us from despair or from unhealthy coping. It has to be our faith. And I love that you said, hey, when you don't, sometimes you're flying high and faith doesn't seem very important. But when you get down to these moments of despair that every human will eventually hit, thank you for sharing. It really
Yeah,
made a difference. Also, thank you for sharing that not everyone has this pie in the sky moment where everything is better, but that you
yeah,
had a journey to still walk, but there was a new spark of
yeah,
hope, which is so beautiful to hear. So thank
yeah.
you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love talking about it and my hope and my prayer for just my life in general, but
Yeah.
especially with this book is um that people see that especially with this book that we are all of us experience grief,
Mhm.
suffering,
Mm.
pain, joy, celebration, success. Like that is the human experience. The human experience is living smack dab in the tension of joy and grief,
Yeah.
celebration and suffering, success and failure. Like we sometimes simultaneously, sometimes within the same day, like,
Yep. Mhm.
that is the human experience. And so the whole goal of writing this book was to share my story through that lens, but helping people to see like my story isn't just my story, it's God's story, it's your story.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's gonna yours is gonna look different than mine, but, that hopefully you feel a little less alone in
Yes.
wherever you are in your journey, and to know that, that there is hope, that hope can be found, and, I really want people to close the book, or anytime they interact with me anywhere online or anything like that, to just feel a sense of hope, a sense of joy that they're going to laugh, they
Yeah.
might cry,
Yeah.
all of it, and that those feelings are good and okay and right. Um, but we
Mm.
can't. I actually heard this quote yesterday, and I just feel like I have to share it because it just fits. It fits so well with that. Is Jesus will never leave us, but he will also never leave us the same.
Mm.
He's never going to leave us. But if we actually are in his presence, he's never going to leave us the
Mm.
same. And so that is like the journey that I want to be on constantly. I think that's the journey that all of us strive to be on, is that like that we're constantly growing and evolving.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I know I don't feel as alone after reading your book. I know that everyone here doesn't. And guys, something that's really kind of beautifully shocked me is I hadn't read her book before. Like she had interviewed me first, so I hadn't really known her very well. And following you on Facebook even gave me an even more personal view. And I'm like, guys, for how much she shares. We always thinking, I can't share because nobody will like me. Like Molly has more personal friends than anyone else I know on Facebook. Like I'm just like, this girl is so social. And yet she puts it all out there, which is I think how we all want to be. I'm very high perceiver on the Myers-Briggs test, if you know that one at all. And I love authenticity. And so I think
Mm,
that's why I really connect with your book, is I'm like, when we're beautifully authentic, and that does mean, like you said, holding joy, holding embarrassing as crap stories, and
mhm,
also holding the beautiful moments together with those, like you are going to find community. And it may
mm.
not be that same community that you thought you would have, but it's going to be real community and rich community. And I think you're a really great example of that. So thank
Thank
you for
you.
sharing.
Thank
Where
you
are
for
you leading your community so others can find you?
Yes. Well, I would love if you would go get a copy of the book. Obviously,
Yes,
If I
of
Don't Laugh, I'll
course.
Cry. It releases March 26th. So depending on when this airs, it's either already out or about to come out.
Yep.
I do, if you like the sound of these vocal cords, I do read the
Mhm.
audiobook,
Yes.
which was really
You have
fun
a
to
great
do.
radio voice.
I sing in it. I do some character voices. I mean, I do like a whole, I got really, I had fun with it.
Fun.
And then you can find me online. I'm stillbeingmolly.com. And I'm on
Mm.
Instagram. I'm at still being Molly. And my podcast is called Can I Laugh on Your Shoulder? So, and
Oh,
I mean, I'm kind of all over the internet, but Instagram's the place I like to hang out the most.
okay, awesome. And your book is in the show notes, guys. As you can see, it's a treasure trove. So many beautiful stories, so many life-giving tales. Thank you, Molly, for being here and sharing your light with us.
Thank you.
Okay, you guys, I'm so happy you were able to join us for this beautiful time with Molly. What a gift she was and is to us. Make sure that you dive into her beautiful pages and story for yourself. It's available already everywhere you buy books. And as you heard, this is where you can connect with her online in the show notes at stillbeingmolly.com and also her Instagram. And it is hilarious. She's making me laugh so hard with her vulnerability and authenticity. So, hope you get that same burst of joy this week. And also, I hope that you truly allow yourself to join our collective if you would like some fellowship with me too. Okay, I look forward to hopefully seeing you there and talking to you soon. Bye bye.